What's down, people, and welcome back to another episode of Ghetto Gospel. So where we left off at. Last week, we talked about how God promised all this stuff to Abram with no conditions. All he had to do was move when God said move, which sound easy, but this was back when traveling was way harder than just jumping on a Greyhound. Not to mention, that man was 75 years old and was probably already comfortable in his hometown. Regardless, the homie Abram picked up his family and all the stuff they had and headed out to the new spot that God said he was going to show him. And now we caught up. So last week, we left off at the end of verse 5. But it's one thing I want to get out the way right quick. In verse 5, it said that Abram took his family, all their stuff, and all the souls or people they acquired with them when they left Haran. And as far as I could tell, this ain't talking about slaves. It sounded like that when I first read it, but that Hebrew word they translating as souls or people, depending upon what translation of the Bible you got, is a different word from the word for slave you're gonna see later on in this chapter. Yeah, slavery is a thing later in this chapter. So Abram touched down in Canaan, and while he taking it all in, God showed up and told him he was gonna give his offspring all of the land he was looking at. You gotta remember that up until this point, Abram ain't really know where God was taking him. As far as I could tell, he was just headed to Canaan because that's where his pops was taking them before they got sidetracked in Haran. And just a side note, the land of Canaan wasn't empty. Like it tell you right there in verse 6, the Canaanites was living there. Like, imagine if God showed you a dude that already had an old lady and was like, that's gonna be yo. Nah, kill that example. A lot of y'all out there already. Another thing I want to make sure I don't gloss over is the fact that God appeared to Abram. Like when you dig at what that word mean in the Hebrew, everything I see make it look like God showed up in person, like visibly. We ain't really made it far enough in the book yet for y'all to realize why that's so weird, but trust me, y'all gonna see that it ain't too many people up in here that get to see God in person until Jesus show up. And I guess meeting God in person left some kind of impression because the very next thing that Abram did was build an altar. The last time we saw somebody build an altar was when Noah stepped off the boat after everybody on the planet got wiped out. So what that tell me is that even though all they talking about is Abram taking a stroll around a piece of land, it's something important enough about it that Abram decided to build an altar to make sure he ain't forget. So after he built his altar, he moved on to another part of the land. I guess he decided to come back when them other folks move out. And after that, verse 8 through 9 say he started making his way down south. And this is where things start getting spicy. So verse 10 say it was a famine in the land. Famine usually mean that folks is going hungry. And Abram decided he was gonna head down to Egypt until the famine calmed down. And right before he crossed over into Egypt, he told his wife, girl, you look good, won't you tell these Egyptian folks that you my sister, so that none of them try to kill me to get to you? And sure enough, when the Egyptians saw his wife, they was like, ooh, is she bad? And Pharaoh heard about her and was like, baby girl, you gonna come stay with me. And he started lacing that boy Abram because he was feeling his sister. He started giving them all of these animals and yes, slaves. The first time you see the word slaves in the Bible is when the Egyptians gave him to Abram because his wife, sister, was staying at the royal crib. It don't go into explicit details, so we don't really know what was happening while Sarai was staying at Pharaoh's house. But this whole little ordeal sound messed up, right? I guess God felt the same way. Because in verse 17, it say that God struck Pharaoh and his whole house with plague. When you look at what the words really mean in Hebrew, it translates more like God put hands on Pharaoh and all of his people. And somehow, all of a sudden, Pharaoh magically knew that this happened because he had Sarai up under his roof. And all of a sudden, he magically knew that that was that man's wife. And he was like, damn, what is wrong with you? Why would you do this to me? Given the fact that Pharaoh was the ruler of Egypt and all of that, I get the feeling that he probably wouldn't have had no problem taking that man's wife before God decided to put hands on him. But that's neither here nor there. So Pharaoh told Abram to take all of his stuff and get to stepping. And so he left Egypt way richer than he was when he came in, with his wife, a bunch more animals, and slaves. We're gonna talk more about the slaves in another episode. Please believe we ain't done with that. So that's it for this week. I'll see y'all next week. And as always, peace, and I hope y'all people straight.